Well, hey kids, can anybody hear me out there in YouTube land? Hello, 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 everybody. Can you hear me now? Well, I guess not. All right, well, maybe we'll wait another minute or two for some folks to show up. All right, well, can anybody hear me out there? Is there anybody in the world out there? Hello, Sorrente, how are you doing? I am glad to see you here today. How have you been? Psycho Panda, nice to see you here too. Hello, Judy, nice to see you. You can hear me? Excellent, Sorrente, thank you very much. Nice to see you guys dropping in on a Sunday evening. Boy, it's warm in here. I'm going to take that off. My bald head blinding everybody? Maybe I should leave it on. Might be too bright for everybody. Hello, Austin. Nice to see you. Welcome. Yes, it's been hot up here in Alaska. It's actually been very hot. It is 17 degrees outside, but it was 23 earlier today, so pretty warm. In fact, it was 29 most of yesterday, so we're almost up out of the freezing zone, which is kind of scary for us here in Alaska. Usually we're in the minus temperatures now, but we seem to have warmed up quite a bit. So hello, Christine, nice to see you. How are you doing? Glad to see you here. It was 3 degrees here. Psycho Panda, where are you located? Where is Psycho Panda today? Missouri. Wow, 3 degrees in Missouri. That's cold. You know, it's funny, everybody in the lower 48 got hit with this big snowstorm and wind chill. That actually came south out of the Arctic, but to the east of us. So here in Alaska, we never got that. It went right past us. We already had a big cold front over top of us. It went right past us and straight down into you guys. In fact, parts of Montana barely got hit. Idaho and Washington didn't get any of it. You saw some snow. Wow, snow in Missouri. That's got to make the roads there pretty hazardous because you guys do not know how to drive on snow. Now, the other day, I had to drive all the way to Anchorage in the wee hours in the morning. We had 6 inches of fresh powder on the ground when I got up and had to dust it off my truck. So I had snow for the first, 50 miles or so driving into Anchorage. And, still doing 65 miles an hour down the highway because up here in Alaska, we've just learned how to drive through that. And at that hour, the wee hours in the morning, it was for me, 6 a.m., there wasn't anybody else out on the road, which was pretty lucky for me. They don't know how to drive, period. Yeah, that probably may be true. That may be true. I know there's a big difference between those of us that live up here in Alaska and the people in the lower 48 as far as driving is concerned, though. You get to learn. But, they also plow our roads differently here. They tend to leave some snow on the road, builds up a crust that they then groom. They actually drag it with road graders that have a serrated blade that cuts grooves into it, and that makes it easier to handle. You have steering and stuff with those grooves that give you some steering and stuff, so it kind of works out fairly well for us. Okay, well, we have a small crowd today, but we're 5 minutes in, so why don't we get kind of going? You guys noticed I did not upload hardly anything in the way of videos this week. Minus 11 last Thursday here. Sorrente, where are you again? 38 degrees in the UK. Austin. That's, I don't know, is that cold or normal for where you're at in the UK? I think that's cold for the UK. I didn't think the UK got, you're right surrounded in ocean. And that seems to temper the temperatures pretty good. I guess maybe inland central UK probably gets a lot colder than along the coast. I know places like Scotland, Ireland, Wales, They probably get a bit colder. Massachusetts, yeah, we got it from the cold front. There you go. Yeah. Of course, Massachusetts does get cold. And northern Massachusetts gets all the lake effect, or some of the lake effect snow, I think. Or does that get quite that far? That all ends up in Vermont and New Hampshire. I imagine some of it gets to Massachusetts. Actually, you're probably a little too south of the Great Lakes to get that, aren't you? You're more down along the coast. Well, depending on where you live in Massachusetts. So, okay. Well, today I was trying to figure out some topics to talk about, and been a bad week for me. I had a divorce hearing this week, and so I had to deal with that, and it kind of put me in a bad mood. Just wasn't in any mood to be able to make videos or do anything positive and up tempo, and so I had to go deal with that nonsense, and it looks like that's working out well, but we'll see what happens. Not too bad. Without the Gulf Stream, we could have Chicago winters. Oh, there you go. Okay. Yeah, wind bothers me. Where I lived in Montana, it would get cold. It would get as cold in Montana as what we get up here in Alaska, but that biting wind, just made it horrible. We do not get much wind where I live in Alaska anyway. We don't. So, anyhow, trying to think of topics to talk about. A lot of my subscriber base is changing over now from the homesteading folks over to the more sailing, cruising, scuba diving type folks. And so that change is really changing my subscribers as well as my content that I'm starting to put out. I do have a video I'm working on right now that probably could be out in the next day or two. I'm waiting for a sunny day so I can shoot some aerial stuff, but this most recent snowstorm we got up here left us about 6-8 inches of fresh powder, and the woods are looking pretty. I'm just waiting for some sunshine to get out and shoot it so it looks nice. Take the drone out and shoot it, and I'm going to do a video clip about the snow up here. Of course, I think at this point everybody in the lower 48 is probably tired of hearing about snow, but it's something that I thought I could add in, at least have some content other than, well, have some content. So until I get to buy my sailboat and sail off, there's really not much I can do. And up here in Alaska, we're kind of buried in snow. Just not much we can do outside right now. So not much in the way of video production, but some stuff coming up anyway. So today I wanted to talk about fishing because it's a fun subject and it gives me an opportunity to get out my toys and play with them. And so I thought I would start with that and see where we go from there. I don't know how many of you folks might be interested in fishing for cruisers. Cruisers meaning people that sail around the world. It's different than fishing for any other way. And let me kind of explain to that. When you're a sailor and you're sailing around the world, you don't have a lot of refrigeration on board. So you don't need a lot of fish. In fact, when you're fishing, you don't want to catch you guys can't see my hands. You don't want to catch great, big, huge fish. You want to catch little fish. And there's two reasons for that. One, because generally speaking, you only have a very small fry pan and very little refrigeration. So you just don't need to put a bunch of fish in the refrigerator. Actually, I guess there's three reasons. The second reason is they might as well stay swimming around nice and fresh under the ocean than dead in your cooler. You have the opportunity to go out and get more at any moment. You're living on top of the sea, on top of the ocean. So all those fish are swimming down underneath you there somewhere. So it's easy to go out and get more fish all the time. Sorrenti, I was wondering the same thing. I wonder where the moderators are at. It almost looks like we have no moderators tonight. So, which is fine. I'm moderating it myself. We don't have a huge group. There's very few of us watching today. And that's cool. With me making my change, I expected that. A lot of folks are not into fishing too. And since you're not into fishing, this makes a difference. Oh, there's Rhonda. She just joined in. She'd been asleep. She's been having some technical difficulties as well. I imagine that played somewhat into it. But anyhow, and then the last reason that you don't want to put a lot of fish into your refrigerator and catch really big fish is a disease called ciguatera. Ciguatera is a toxin, Gambiricus toxis. It's naturally found in tropical waters, And what happens is the small fish will eat it off the coral reefs and stuff and pick it up that way in small, very small doses. And in those doses, it's so small it won't bother you. Again, it's a solution by dilution kind of thing. But what happens is the larger reef fish, like the big grouper and stuff, eat a bunch of those small reef fish, and in doing so, they end up doing something called biomagnification. They take a little bit of toxin from this one and from this one and from this one, and they pull it all together, and now they start building a bigger and bigger dosage of the toxin in there. Now, ciguatera is a very bad disease. There's no cure for it. It's kind of like Montezuma's Revenge in that you have diarrhea and you're throwing up and you're achy and you have problems. It actually restricts blood flow. There's a number of symptoms to it. It's very painful, very uncomfortable, lasts for a long time, like a week, 10 days, sometimes as long as a month, and pretty much renders you useless. So you can't do very much. And when you're sailing alone by yourself, that's a problem. So as a general rule, while I'm out cruising on a sailboat, I'm not looking to catch large fish, especially on the reef. Now, I might want to catch something large for sport, but generally speaking, I don't really want to catch something large while out fishing. Yes, Sorrenti, it really is. It's horrible. It's worse than the flu. It's very uncomfortable, cramping, vomiting, diarrhea. It seems to me like even your earwax flies out of your ears. Everything's coming out at once. It's really nasty, and it stays with you for a very long time. And it can, with very little motivation, reoccur occasionally on its own without any stimulus. So it's something then that you then carry with you. So it's something you really want to avoid if at all possible. And you can avoid that simply by being very careful of your fish choices. Taking a spear gun, jumping down on the reefs, and going and shooting a great big grouper sounds like a good idea, but in fact, it's not a good way. It is a good way to get ciguatera. Ciguatera is found more plentiful in certain areas than others, like Australia. The Great Barrier Reef has a lot of it. Some parts of French Polynesia, some parts of Florida. It is found in certain areas. So go ahead, Rhonda. Do what you got to do. Do what you got to do. So anyhow, while out fishing, we try to avoid getting ciguatera. And also, another bad thing about ciguatera is it can be passed sexually. It is a venereal disease, actually, that can be passed from one human being to another. So if I have ciguatera, I could give it to a sex partner. So again, something to want to watch out and avoid. Anyhow, let's talk a little bit about toys, because that's kind of what I wanted to do, was have a little fun and talk about toys. And today, in preparation for this, I got to pull a bunch of my toys out and play with them and clean them up. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about what is typical saltwater fishing gear. This is your typical saltwater fishing gear. This is a Penn Senator 114H, and it is on a Penn Senator fishing rod that has the kind of fittings on it that one would have for saltwater. This is a heavy boat rod for catching very big fish. Okay, lot of fun to catch fish on this. Big, you could catch marlin or sailfish or sharks or anyhow, any kind of really big fish. This is what you would want to be using. And generally speaking, what you do with this is you put this in a holder on the back of your boat, and you would be trolling behind you and trolling different lures or fresh baits, and that's what you would use to catch some fish. But like I said, when you're cruising, you really don't want to catch great big fish because you just don't have a lot of room in a refrigerator or freezer, nor the need to refrigerate or freeze fish. Unless you're going to be going into some anchorage, you're going to be there for a while. As long as you're traveling, you'll have availability to catch more, generally speaking. Depends on what you're doing. So you may not necessarily want this rod. Now, what this rod's good for is, let's say the scenario is that you're in an anchorage and you're going to sail from point A to point B, from this island to another island, and it's going to be a 2 or 3 day sail. Well, in that case, put that rod out. Hopefully you catch a nice sized tuna or a nice sized mahi. That'll keep you with enough protein in the refrigerator for 4 or 5 days to carry you over on that trip. But other than that, that rod really would not get much use. It's just too big. Instead, we would go for something smaller, like a spinning rig, like this here. This is a Penn 560 spinning rod on a Shakespeare big water rod, and this is probably my go-to rod for a great deal of the fishing that I do. Very easy to cast, very easy to retrieve, very effective. Not a trolling rod, although I have used it for trolling. It's generally speaking a cast out and retrieve type rod. And I have those in different sizes. Here's a little bit smaller one. In fact, this one's brand new. I haven't even used it yet. And this is, again, a little Penn Battle 2 spinning reel on a Penn Graphite Battle 2 rod. And this is set up for fairly light line. This is 10 to 17 pound. So you would be using this inside of shallow water on much smaller fish like saltwater catfish or flounder or something of that size. What I deem the better eating quality small fish, which is what I tend to aim at quite a bit. And then my favorite all-time rod is this. Can anybody tell me what this is? What kind of a reel is that? Anybody know? This is absolutely my favorite way to fish when I'm out on the boat cruising. This is actually a Temple Fork Outfitters, or TFO by those initials. This is a 10 weight reel. Fly fishing, yes, Sorrenti, that's correct. That's my fly fishing reel. That's my 10 weight. I have an 8 and 10 weight reel rod set up. And this is my favorite way to fish while I'm out cruising, because how I fish normally when I'm out on the boat is I'll be moving from point A to point B, and I will sail past an object in the water. Could be a large mat of grass floating, sorghum, they call it, sargasso, I'm sorry, they call it, or I might see an object floating out in the water. These tend to attract and congregate fish underneath of them, typically fish like mahi-mahi or triple tail. And so I will take that fly rod and specifically target a fish. I'll see the fish swimming around the object, or quite often they'll swim up and get up behind my boat, and I'll see the fish in the water, and with that fly rod I can then go ahead and present a nice fly like this doohicker here. I would throw a fly like this that stimulates a small bait fish. This one's got 2 hooks. I don't know if you can see that. There's a bottom hook here, and there's a top stinger hook up here. So it's very effective on catching things like tunas and mahis and even triple tail, cobia, fish like that are very good eating. So I use this a lot more than most of the other tackle that I would use while I'm out. Austin, mine are wooden. The rod is cane as well. Austin, I do have some old wood rods and wood and bamboo fly rods as well. I don't recommend them for saltwater. Generally speaking, those are reserved for freshwater, because this is just a little too heavy. Rhonda's asking, do you tie your own flies? Yes and no. I have tied my own flies in the past. Right now, I have a bunch, so there's no need to. But when I run low, I will tie and make up some more. So I kind of enjoy that. It's a bit of a fun pastime to sit there and tie your own flies. Austin says I don't have time. Okay, well, cool. Well, I usually don't either, but if I'm out on a boat for a while and I got a lazy day in Anchorage, it might be fun to tie a new fly if I'm running low. So anyhow, fly fishing with fly rods is my go-to favorite way to fish. I find it very therapeutic. Yeah, tying flies can be very therapeutic. I used to live in Montana on the banks of the Yellowstone River, Used to do a lot of trout fishing. And so in trout fishing, we would tire a lot of our own flies. And I also used to do a lot of really light saltwater fishing, like bonefish and permit and that kind of stuff up in the shallows. And that tends to be some fairly lightweight stuff. Although, throwing something like this to tarpon would also be a lot of fun. But what's the point? I'm not going to be eating them, so it will be only for sport, not for dinner. And as a cruiser, I fish for dinner, not just for the fun of it. It's a matter of putting some protein in the fridge. So, all right, with that said, I'm going to go through here and talk to you about, let me move my table a little bit, about a bunch of different fishing gear that I have. I have seen a lot of people that sail make a real serious mistake. They'll tie something like this on to their line and troll this behind their boat. This is actually a musky plug, although it has a lot of use in saltwater. This is not effective. Throwing something big like this out there and trolling it behind your boat when you're sailing from, across the oceans or whatever, this is not an effective bait for that kind of fishing. First of all, it doesn't at all resemble anything that they would eat normally, naturally. And this has got a little bit of a lip on it, so it's going to dive down underneath the water. It's going to wiggle back and forth, but it's not going to make much noise or much action, as it's called. So it's not an effective way to fish when you're out sailing and going to be dragging some lines behind you. You don't want big, heavy, palooka, chugging type baits like this out there. I've seen some people use baits like these. These are hard baits. This is a squid replica, which is not a bad choice, but again, it's a hard, heavy plug. This is made for casting and retrieving, not for trolling. I've also seen people use these. Again, this is a cast and retrieve type bait, not a trolling type bait. So these are not effective for that kind of fishing. Have they caught fish? Sure they have. But your percentages are going to be way low fishing with something like that. Okay. The other things that I've seen people use, and I use myself, are soft plastics like this squid imitation. Okay, or this, which is a little pinfish imitation. And you can see it's soft and rubbery. These are made by the Williams Bait Company. It's got a little pretty good size hook that hides up inside the body cavity. As fish come in and grab that, that hook pops out and catches them. Same for the squid. You see it's got a pretty good size hook in that squid. Now, at least the squid and this fish much more closely resemble the kind of natural baits that fishers are going to be eating out in the ocean anyway. They're going to be going after these. So these are acceptable troll baits if you're fishing out in relatively intermix between reef and offshore in that 100 to 250 foot depth range. These can be highly effective. Okay, in the near shore, not onshore, not offshore, in the near shore, these can be highly effective. Okay. The things that do work are these. These are highly effective trolling baits. Little rubber skirt, little flash. You see I've got a bunch of them here, different colors, little different shapes. These are specifically designed for toothy critters. Okay? They have, I don't know if you can see that there. See the leader on them? That leader is wire. It's not monofilament. A lot of the fish that you're going to be fishing for that are pelagics, like wahoo, have teeth, and they will bite off a monofilament line. Typically, you're going to be fishing for mahi and wahoo or tuna, and you're going to be fishing in an area where you're probably going to get a lot of barracuda, and so you want to fish with a metal leader, not a monofilament leader, because the barracudas and the wahoos will simply just bite that off, and then you'll lose your bait. So these are highly effective And I have a bunch of these. I have them. Here's a little bit larger one. It doesn't have the sparkly, but it's got a weighted head. This is weighted, so this is going to fish a little deeper than, say, something like this, which has got a flat chug type head. This is made for being right up on the surface up high, where it's going to chug, pop in and out of the surface and make a lot of bubbles and stuff, and those bubbles on the surface will attract fish. This sort of flat chugger type head has proven to be very effective for catching stuff like tuna and especially wahoo and mahi, which tend to follow right along the surface. Something weighted like this tends to be a bit better for tuna, where we're going a little bit deeper. You can also fish for tuna using slightly larger ones. See, these guys are a little bit bigger. And these are obviously geared for catching much larger fish like sailfish or marlin. But the problem I have with these guys, and I have fished with them, and they're all on stainless steel because I fish them in waters where there's a lot of barracuda, shark, wahoo, is that these are geared for catching fish really too big for what I would want. These are good for going out and going sport fishing, but for the sailing cruising fishermen, these are too large. These sizes are much better for catching dinner. Okay, little 6-inch, 5, 4, 6-inch sizes. Okay. Some of my favorite baits, I don't know if you can see this little guy here. He's been beat to crap. He actually has a monofilament head. I use him very carefully. He's weighted, but I've used him to great success in catching like mahi and small tunas. This guy has seen even more activity. You see he's got bite marks and stuff out of him. Again, he's monofilament. He's got a little stinger hook. And so what I'll do with him is I'll sometimes take some live bait and I'll hook it up here between the two hooks. So the skirt will have a piece of belly meat off of like a bonita tuna or something. I'll put a 7/8 piece of 8-inch piece of belly meat, which will be held by these two hooks. And that gives even then a more natural presentation that tends to attract some pretty good bait fish. Okay, other techniques that we use are things like a bird. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this before, but this is a 2-piece bait. You have the chugger at the back, and then you have the bird that flies in the front. This all ends up out on monofilament line. This piece ends up floating in the water about a foot or two in front of this piece. And again, the idea is to make a lot of racket up on the surface. This thing's job is just to dive in and out of the surface and splash a lot of water and make a lot of noise as it delves in and out of the water. I got a couple of different colors of these that I use. These are very good for attracting fish up onto the surface. Again, fish like your tuna and mahi, which are some of my primary target species. We also have the good old-fashioned, looks like a bass bait. It's got a little flash on it. It's weighted. Again, these are good for pulling through a coral reef if you're trying to catch some reef type fish, or if you're going past like a big hump in the ocean sometime. There'll be pinnacles and stuff. You can pull this through. It'll attract some baits. Okay. And then, as another technique, if you're at anchor someplace and you want to just jig, and what jigging is you simply take your rod, not this one, you would use a spinning rod, and you just up and down, up and down, up and down. You could use a heavy weighted jig like this guy. He's got a big hook on the bottom. Sometimes you can put a little fresh meat on that. This is very thin, but it's very heavy. So and this thing just goes straight up and down. And these can be highly effective. I've got a bunch of these in my kit, and these are good just for jigging. Jigging is really popular in the colder waters, like up here in Alaska. These are highly effective for things like halibut. We'll jig on these. Some of the rockfish. Anyhow, they're highly effective. Okay. And then up here in Alaska, I also use something like this. Again, this is a jig of a different kind. I'll usually attach live bait in my videos. You've seen me use, I think, some smaller versions of this. But I'll tie this on. It's got a lead weight. And we'll bounce this along the bottom. And these tend to do very good for attracting flounders and halibuts and cods and those sorts of things. Okay, and let me see, what else have I got? Sometimes we'll use a device like this. This is sort of an interesting device. I don't know if you guys can see that. What you would do is you would tie your line to this part, tie your weight to this part, and then tie your jig to this part, but further back. Put a little bit of a leader between these two. This is actually, I learned to use things very similar to this growing up as a kid on Long Island. We call them flounder rigs. They have larger ones up here in Alaska for halibut, but you put a weight here and the hook here, it just tends to keep them apart. So this way the bait can have a more natural presentation. But these can help increase your numbers. In the Pacific Northwest, we use a lot of flashers when we're trolling. For salmon, this is actually specifically designed for salmon, but it can be applied for any number of fish. We have a specially designed weighted beveled float. What this does is you cast it in the water and the weight will pull this down. You tie your line here, and as you're trolling, this will be behind it and then you run a bunch of monofilament back and you have your lure back behind this. But you would tow this in the water. This red thing here will cause it to go deeper and off to the side of the boat. It'll plane away from the boat and plane down deeper, giving you more depth. And the way this is designed is it'll travel like this until you have a fish hit, and then it'll pop up like that so you can pull it in. So you're not fighting this while you're reeling the fish in. You're just using it to take the bait further away from you and deeper while you're trolling. So this is a little weighted sled to get it away from you. You would troll a flasher on behind that, and then, maybe a bait like this for salmon, or even something flashy like that behind it for salmon. Salmon like a lot of flash. So, okay. I have a question here, Shrente. Just curious, do you use bobbers in saltwater fishing? You can use bobbers if you're reef fishing, but generally speaking, there's not much application for bobbers in saltwater fishing. I have used bobbers saltwater fishing, but generally speaking, no, I don't. There's just not a lot of use for them. But you can, if you can. You don't drown a worm much in salt water, although you could tie on a minnow or something, and a chub or a small bait fish, and throw that in with your bobber. But usually the problem you run into, Sorrenti, is you're usually fishing at such depths that you would have to reel up, take the bobber off your line while in the middle of fighting the fish, and then reel in the rest of your line, because you're typically fishing in 20, 30, 40, 50 feet of water. And so the bobber would be more in your way than anything else. It's not like, in the freshwater, you have your hook and your bobber is 4 feet up the line from your hook, or, maybe the length of your fishing rod away from the hook. And so you can reel up to the bobber, lift it up, and then the fish is right at hand level. So anyhow, so no, we don't use them a lot, but you could, I guess. It depends on the situation. Maybe if you were in the shallows fishing for sea trout, or for saltwater catfish, maybe flounder in shallow water, on if you're fishing only at high tide. There's something else we need to talk about. In saltwater fishing, you got to deal with tides, and I'm going to get to that in a bit. Do they make slip bobbers for salt? I they make anything for everything. So I imagine somebody out there is probably making a slip bobber for salt, but I haven't used them. So, but before we get to tides, let me put this up here. Who knows what that is? It's weighted, and it's got a bunch of hooks. You see that? Got a bunch of hooks, and it's weighted. Who knows what that is? It's made for a very specific purpose for fishing, and they come in a bunch of different sizes and colors. Anybody? Can anybody guess what that would be used for? No clue. No one's even going to guess, huh? Okay. Guys, this is a squid jig for catching squid. The white part glows in the dark. So what you do is you put a light up to this. I don't know if I can do that here, but you put a light up to this, and then when it's in the dark, it glows. So in deep water, you can still see this. There are very small barbs on the hooks. I don't think I can get it to focus like that. There's just very tiny, tiny barbs on the hooks. Not like a normal hook is barbed. Very tiny ones. But this is specifically made for catching squid. Squid will fish in schools in places like the Sea of Cortez in Mexico. They have really big squids. This would be way too small for, I would need a squid jig, 2 feet tall, a foot and a half tall for some of the Humboldt squid that can run as much as 200 pounds that swim around in the Sea of Cortez. Coastal waters, though, this little squid jig works fine for the 8, 9, 10, 12-inch size squids that we typically catch. I happen to like calamari. I have a bunch of squid jigs, and I use them quite a bit. They are highly effective. I'll put a small weight on the bottom of this. I'll put a light onto this for a while before dropping it over, and then I fish just like a regular jig. I drop it down. If I'm in 100 feet of water, I'll drop this down to 60, 75, 80 feet of water and just jig it up and down in the water column. Sometimes I'll drop it all the way to the bottom and then pull it back up and just up and down. But it's a squid jig. They're highly effective. So, all right, so let's talk about tide. You guys know the tide goes in, the tide goes out. As a general rule, the fish go with it. When the tide goes out, all the fish go out with the tide. When the tide comes back, all the fish come back in with the tide. A general rule of thumb, if you're fishing in an estuary, a canal, a bay, even, where I grew up in Port Washington, New York, we fished in Manhasset Bay there for flounder. And when the tide was going out, as the tide started to go out, maybe the first hour or so, we would have fishing, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, we would have fishing. The tide would go out. There'd be no fishing at all until about 2 hours before high tide, and then the fish would be coming back in. So you could schedule your fishing in saltwater based just on that tide. If you see the tides coming in, get your baits and stuff in the water, fish through the high tide, and as the tide starts going back out, you'll see the bite turn off. They'll come in, they'll be biting like crazy, and then they'll just turn off and go away. So you can really kind of set your fishing schedule up in some areas by the tide. You'll be looking at your tide charts. I am also a big advocate of the solar tables, the lunar, watching the moon phases and what position that's in. All my electronic devices, I have software on here that will enable me to look at the ideal fishing times, and it'll tell you, you're going to have your best time is going to be from 2 to 4 o'clock today, and you're going to have another good time at 9 to 10 o'clock this morning, and then 2 to 4 this afternoon. Those are going to be the good fishing times. I've found out through trial and error and many years of fishing that those things are golden. So, if you have a situation where you have the solar table telling you the fish are going to be active from from, let's say, 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock, or 11 o'clock till 2 o'clock, those 3 hours, and your high tide is going to be at 1 o'clock. So you're going to have the 2 hours of that's going to be incoming tide, and then you're going to have a slack tide and a half hour of the outgoing tide. Boy, that's the time to go fishing. You're going to catch 20 times, 100 times more fish in that period than if you went fishing 12 hours later when the tide was out, and, well, 6 hours later when the tide was out and the solar table was off. So it's really a good idea to look at both of those. Look at the solar tables for what's the best fishing time, and look at the tide charts to see when the tide's coming in and going out. Some of the areas where I'm going to be fishing in the tropics, tide is not really an issue. I spent a year living down in Marathon, Florida, the better part of a year living in Marathon, Florida, and our tide there was all of about 4 inches. So it just didn't matter. Up here in Alaska, we have 16, 17 feet of tide. So yes, it matters up here. 16 or 17 feet of tide is huge up here. And when the tide goes out, like I said, the fishing goes out with it. So you might as well find something else to do, because you're not going to catch fish. You got to fish at your best time. So with that said, I want to move on to the next thing is fishing for cruisers. I highly recommend this book, Sport Fish of Florida. It's by the Florida Sportsman magazine. My copy is kind of old and bedraggled at this point. What I particularly like about this is you can look at a particular fish, like in this case a lane snapper. Snapper, generally speaking, are pretty good to eat. And it says here, food quality, very good, but flesh is soft and must be kept well iced. So it tells you how to care for the fish and whether it's good eating or not. By the same token, if you were to go to something like a blue striped grunt, it's going to tell you the food value is very good. I didn't know that. Blue striped grunt, the food value is very good. Triggerfish, and I knew triggerfish were very good. Some of them may consider them absolutely excellent. Cirro mackerel. You look at cirro mackerel, very good, lighter flesh than the Spanish mackerel, but nearly as oily. So it's a very oily fish. I do find out that they tend to be pretty optimistic as far as being really good eating. For example, skipjack tuna. This guy here with the stripes on him, you can see him. Very common tuna, caught in most oceans. I agree with their assessment in here. It says dark flesh, good, but not to most tastes. If I have to catch a skipjack, I'll just turn it back loose. I wouldn't eat a skipjack. Albacore, on the other hand, really good eating. I was surprised to see, though, they showed the food value even for different species of shark, which I found pretty interesting. I never noticed if they have mako in here and what their assessment is of mako. You can see, yep, shortfin mako, food value excellent, comparable to swordfish. Yep, I would agree with that. You can see how water stained and messed up my book is. It's a very good book that I use it a lot, and so I recommend carrying a book like this because it tells you about fish value. Now, where that comes in handy is in the second part of how to go fishing for a cruiser as a cruiser, and that is spear fishing. I don't have my spear guns or that gear here with me. It's in storage in Montana, so I really can't get into that as a live stream right now. But the nice thing about spear fishing is you can be very selective with what you shoot. So if you've studied up on this book and you've learned the different species that are better eating than others, when you go spear fishing on the reef, or wherever you're fishing, you kind of target those better eating fishes. It's really that simple. You don't want to shoot some big old nasty fish. You want to shoot something that's going to taste really good. So you can be very selective. But again, you're not having to catch a lot of fish. This is not like the fishing shows where you see these guys go out and fill a locker in the boat with 30 fish in there that they caught that day. As a cruiser sailor, there's no need to do that. We would go out and just catch what we need to eat for the day, and that's it. And tomorrow, if we're not successful catching fish, well, then we open a can of chili or something. But as a general rule, I don't keep fish in the refrigerator. I keep them in the ocean until I need one. So, what else? Hook removers. I don't know if you guys have ever seen something like this. This is a hook remover, and how this works is you hook the line through it, and you see how that catches the hook. It'll catch the hook, and the hook will tend to turn in. Even if I try turning it the other direction, which I'm trying to, it turns in. See how the hook aligns here with this rod? So you take your line, you pull it up, and then you simply just take your hand and go backwards real fast, and it makes it easy to knock the fish off the hook. That's what these are designed for, and they're pretty effective. I like one about this length because it would enable me to pull a hook out of something like a shark without worrying about losing too many digits. So I highly recommend that somebody carry something like this with them while out saltwater fishing. I also recommend somebody carry a fighting belt with them. When you've got that rod and you've got it stuck in your gut, it's going to hurt you after a while. It's going to make a dent in your belly and be uncomfortable and be painful. So you might want to consider some mechanism for protecting yourself from the rod butt, because sometimes when you're fishing and you're catching pretty good sized fish, you might be there a while fighting that fish, because it's not like, you know, going out and catching a bass and just cranking them in. Sometimes you might be out there for an hour trying to reel that fish in and fighting it all over the ocean. So just be prepared for that. When you're saltwater fishing, the front of your spinning rod, there's a little dial here. This controls your drag. You want to put your line out before you start fishing. You run your line out. You have your friend grab your line, not with a hook on, just grab the line, pull it, and you pull against them until you hear, I don't know if you can hear that little clicking sound. That's the line coming out. You want to set your drag at the maximum that you can handle on your rod, but giving the fish some distance. Now, some fish have a relatively soft mouth, and so you might want to give them a bit more drag, or, you know, ease the drag up on them. So you might have to fight them a little harder because they have a soft mouth, and if you pull too hard, you'll just pull the hook out of them. So you want to worry about setting your drags. On some of the heavy rods, like, you know, this bad boy, this drag is controlled by this star-shaped wheel here, by turning this star-shaped wheel here. And on that one, you got to figure out your own strength and your own abilities, because that drag will set up pretty tight. I've got 50-pound fishing line on that rod, which means I can put 50 pounds of pressure against that fish as I'm fighting them. So I usually set my drag at about 40 pounds or 45 pounds, but I'm a big guy with strong arms. If you're a small, lightweight woman, you might want to, or a child, you might want to crank that drag back to 20 pounds, because, you know, 20 pounds is a lot of weight to pull. Okay, it's easy to pull 20 pounds. It's easy to pull 40. Most guys can pull 50. For the first 5 minutes, that's easy. Next 10 minutes, a little bit harder. An hour into the fight, you're going to want that drag set down to 20 pounds. You're going to want it set pretty easy, because it just wears you out. It just wears you out with time. So know your rods and know how to set your drag. On your fly rods, the wheel is here on the opposite side. And you can see how that is. You reel forward. If you reel backwards, you can feel the drag against it. So you see how much drag that you've got. Don't ever set your drag to exceed your line strength on your reels, or your tippet. Typically at the end of the fly rod, we'll tie on something called tippet, which is even finer line, very light line. Now for the saltwater, I'm usually using something like 20-pound test line, so it's pretty good. On freshwater, I might go as light as 8x tippet on my 3-weight rod. So, Judy, you're lost. I'm sorry. Okay. How many extra O-crap rods are you taking for lot rods? You're taking for a lot. What's a lot rod? My inventory, Judy, is I have 2 heavy-duty boat rods. Okay. I have 2 heavy-duty boat rods. This one and another one like it, but the other one has a level wind on it. So I have 2 heavy-duty light rods, or heavy rods rather. I have 2 heavyweight spinning rods. I have 2 lightweight spinning rods. I'm looking overhead because they're in a rack up here above me. I have 2 heavyweight, 2 medium weight, and 2 lightweight spinning rods. So altogether, I don't know, you know, probably 30 rods I'm probably going to have out with me while I'm out cruising, because I'm going to have some redundancy in there, and just what I've amassed and collected over the years. Nothing lasts forever. So I've got a couple freshwater rods. Yeah, okay, freshwater, saltwater. Do not, I repeat, do not take freshwater equipment out on the ocean. It will be destroyed. Out on the ocean, you want rods and reels and fishing rods, fishing reels, and lures specifically designed for saltwater to take up that extra amount of corrosion that we see in saltwater. So don't take your freshwater rods to the ocean, folks. You're just going to ruin them. You're going to ruin them pretty quick. And, you know, fishing rods are getting expensive nowadays. I mean, they really are. I'm really surprised at how expensive they're getting these days. You know, it's nothing to have $500 in a rod. That's a $300 fishing reel and at least another $100 for the line on it. Just that. Another $300 for this rod. So there's a $600 setup for a fly rod. This little set here was $120 for this little. I know that because the price tag's still on it. But this is a little lightweight saltwater pen reel, Battle 2 with a Battle 2 rod. You know, that's 120 bucks. So, and that's about as inexpensive as they get. So fishing gear is pretty expensive. So, and I do take a lot with me. This is just a very small selection of my saltwater fishing gear. I probably have more I have a wheelbarrow, literally a wheelbarrow load of saltwater fishing tackle. So I'm the kind of guy that goes into a Bass Pro Shops or a Cabela's or any fishing store and leaves there with 20 pounds of more tackle than what I had when I walked in. So you never have enough. And then, of course, you see all the stuff I have, all these different colors. Some of these lures will come in 10 or 20 different colors, and depending on, there's a good thing for you to talk about. Okay. On a bright, here you go. On a bright sunny day, which of these two do you think would be a better bait? The dark blue one or the yellow one on a bright sunny day? The lighter. The brighter it is, the lighter your lure. This is a bright sunny day. This is cloudy and overcast, murky day. The water's dark, use a dark lure. If the water's light, use a light color lure. This would be for a dark, cloudy day. This would be for a bright sunny day. You need to have all these different colors with you. So a red and white bobber, guess that's freshwater. Yes, red and white bobbers are freshwater. You would not use that in saltwater. It's just not designed for it. Keep in mind, when you're fishing saltwater, you're usually catching fish that, what you would normally catch, hey, a big bass in freshwater is a bait fish if I'm going fishing for marlin. I would tie a 2 pound, 3 pound bait fish on to go out and fish for marlin. I've tied on 5 pound skipjack tuna to go out for shark. So what you would catch as a freshwater fish is considered bait fish in the saltwater genre. They just tend to be much larger. So yeah, you don't want to take your red and white bobbers out for salt water. Just going to eat them alive. They'll just rust up and fall apart on you. They might work for, that day. They'll certainly last that day while you're out fishing, but after that, they'll be toast. Now, that said, they do make saltwater bobbers. But generally speaking, as I said, you're fishing in such deep water, bobbers just aren't really effective. So it's just not a technique that we use very often. We fly fish. We do a lot of trolling. We don't do a lot of cast. If you're up in the reeds fishing for like redfish or trout, saltwater trout, that is, then then you're casting and reeling in, casting and reeling in. So you're throwing plugs for that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, as a cruiser sailing around the world on a sailboat, I'm going to be mostly blue water fishing and deep waters, and so I'm mostly going to be trolling, or I'm going to be motoring along or sailing along until I find some debris or something floating out in the water, some what we call a FAG, a fish aggregating device, anything floating out in the water. An old barrel, a shipping container, a wood pallet, a palm tree, whatever it is that's floating out in the ocean is going to congregate life around it. And in those cases, I prefer going up with either spinning gear, light spinning gear, or my fly rod and catching the fish that are on the edge of that. Just more fun for me. So anyhow, that's kind of it for the fishing gear. Just kind of some of the stuff that I like to use. Do your homework on the fish species that you want to fish for. And if you have any questions about specific species and what to use for those, get into the comments here now or get in the comments afterwards, and I'll be happy to answer your questions about those. I have fished all around the world at this point, so I have a little bit of experience with that. 58 years of fishing. I've fished the Med, I've fished the Persian Gulf, I've fished the Indian Ocean, the Atlantic, and the Pacific, the Caribbean, Sea of Cortez, Pacific Northwest. I fished all over the world, so might be able to help you out if you have a question. Or moonlight. What about moonlight? Blue. What do you guys mean blue? Red and white bobber, blue. Oh, you were talking about the blue for sunlight. No. For sunlight, you want to use light colored. For dark water, dark colored. Look out for floating shipping containers out in the water, though some have Aldi's coffee in them. Yeah, there's a lot of shipping containers. Actually, they're a hazard to navigation. There's a lot of documented cases of people running into shipping containers and sinking their boat because they'll hit the steel shipping container. Believe it or not, those steel containers, if they, especially the refrigeration kind, if they go overboard on ships, which happens quite a bit, more so than what you might think, they float, and some of them can be floating around for very, very many years. So, okay, I'm going to do a shout out today. I'm going to do a shout out to these folks. Their name is Drenched, D-R-E-N-C-H-E-D. They might be hard to find under that name because their channel name is Drenched. But if you search on one of their videos or try to find one of their videos, they do scuba diving out of Hawaii. So they do a lot of video footage of scuba diving, a lot of underwater footage. They're about the only people out there right now that are putting up regular videos about scuba diving anywhere. Something I'm going to be doing a lot of while I'm doing my show. But I thought you guys might want to check these guys out. And I'm sorry about the picture quality there. I wish I could get that better for you, but unfortunately I cannot. That is as good as my channel will let me, my page will let me pull up. I will tell you that The video that's pictured there is titled Epic Travel and Dive Adventure, Highest Heights and Deepest Depths. So if you do a search for Epic Travel and Dive Adventures, I'm sure that will probably bring you to their channel, and that might be the easiest way for you to find them. So anyhow, there's my shout out for the channel Drenched on YouTube. They're good folks. So, all right, well, that kind of pretty much ends the show. Unless anybody's got some questions for me, we're going to call it here. And because it's Christmas next week, we will not be having a live stream next week. There will not be a live stream next Sunday. I'm just letting you guys know ahead of time. So, matter of fact, the next live stream will probably be after the New Year's. We'll probably wait until after the New Year's. So, no, probably not going to make a beeline for the Big Island. I'm going to head down the coast to the Sea of Cortez, and then from there head over to French Polynesia, the Galapagos and French Polynesia. I'm going to be going around Hawaii. It's just too commercial for me, and it's very expensive there, and I don't know that I'm going to be sailing to. Now, that might change. You know, there's a lot of people that sail from Hawaii and make a beeline straight to Hawaii. So maybe, you know, I might change my mind and decide to go ahead and do that. I don't know. Time will tell. That's all I can tell you is time will tell. So, all right, Rhonda put up a link to Drench's channel. There it is. So if anybody wants to go check them out, feel free to do so. And unless anybody else has got another question, we're going to go ahead and end the video here, the live stream. Please do like and subscribe. I'm going to give it a minute here for anybody to see if there's any last minute questions. Anybody, nobody? Okay. I don't know how long my delay is. I say something and sometimes it takes a while for people to respond. So, nope. Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and end it here, guys. You guys have a really good day. We will catch you later. Please do like and subscribe. Oh, I got an update. That says Grandpa's Farm on there. Please do like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys another day. Oh, and Merry Christmas, everybody. Yes, Merry Christmas, everybody. You guys have a great holiday season.